Hello, Shiver Seekers. Are you ready to follow us into the unknown? I'm Cynthia,
And I'm Stefanie. You have found the dark oak.
and today I'm going to be talking to you about probably the most famous murder investigation in the entire world. It's the murder of JonBenet Ramsey.
Welcome to the Dark Oak, the mystery podcast with purpose. Each month through our charity, the Branch of Hope Foundation, we give a portion of earnings from our Patreon and sponsors to a nonprofit related to the first episode of the month. To find out more information, head to thedarkoak.com or stay to the end of this episode and we'll give you all the information.
Well, thank you, Stefanie.
Baby, it's dark oak time.
Yes, it is dark oak time.
I hope all of our listeners have seen our special Christmas gift.
Oh, I'm sure that has gone beyond viral by now. I mean, how could it not? By the time you're listening to this, listeners, we've probably signed contracts and are preparing for our world tour, not just as podcasters, but also as vocalists.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I really feel like that was the niche that we were missing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just so proud of us.
Well, hey, your children said it best when they said you sound exactly like Taylor Swift.
T Swift in the house, guys.
Yeah. Quite frankly, I was very intimidated to sing with Stefanie because, I'm no Taylor Swift.
Was it my singing you were intimidated by, or was it the hair?
Well, the hair was fantabulous, if I do say so myself. I mean, listeners, if you haven't seen this yet, you're like, what are we talking about? But go to any of our social medias and you'll see the little music video we did.
The special music video, Christmas entertainment, and also some tips on staying alive.
Yeah. Everything you could possibly want. One video.
And it's dark oak time.
Yes, it is.
We hope it's an earworm. You're just laying in bed, hearing our voices saying, dark oak time.
All I can say is you're welcome.
I had a lot of fun doing that with you. We may have to make it an annual thing. I don't know.
That's right. That's right. We'll start working on costuming for next year. Bigger and better and taller hair.
I don't even know if that's possible, but we can try.
Well, I'm glad we got to talk about something a little fun because I'm going to bring it way down today. And I think it goes without saying that this is a case that has been covered many, many times. So right off the bat, I'm aware that some listeners may think that this episode's just going to be a regurgitation of what they already know. However, one of the problems that comes along with a case being so highly covered is sometimes a lot of what becomes widespread may or may not be factual, but it becomes kind of common knowledge. It may not even be true.
It's interesting. We both are drawn to similar cases, but we both have different wheelhouses. Mine is more kind of historic crime and kind of nuanced. You sometimes get drawn to the more publicized cases. And what's incredible about both of those, I bring cases people may not have heard of, but then you bring cases people know about, but you bring facts to the case. And in many situations, you've actually disproven things that I thought I knew about the case.
Oh,
you've called
you.
out things that I thought was common knowledge, like, oh, that of course that happened. And then you said I wasn't able to find this anywhere.
Right. We do our best here to try to provide facts, and that's what I'm going to do again here today. Even in researching this case, I thought I knew everything there was to know about it, and there were a few things that I thought, oh, I don't know that I knew that. So hopefully I bring you something new today. One of the things I will say is that in recent years, John Ramsey, JonBenet's father, has come forward and said, I want people to keep talking about this case. because I don't want anyone to ever forget. The more we talk about it, the more attention we can bring to it. And maybe one day we may actually find out who killed JonBenet Ramsey, which for a period of time, I don't know that anybody actually thought was possible. I think as time goes by and science advances, I think it becomes more of a possibility. So that's really exciting to think about.
And John Ramsey himself has been a lot more vocal on this case as well.
Absolutely. Now, because this case is so chock full of information, this is actually going to be a two-parter. My very first two-parter here at the Dark Oak. It's just way too much information to try to pack into 1 hour-long episode. Now, one more disclaimer before I dive into this case. I did not realize when I prepared this episode that one of the top true crime podcasts in the world was going to be releasing a 3.5-hour episode on JonBenet at the end of last month. And then within 3 days of that, there would be another brand new documentary on the case that came out on Netflix. But for you listeners, I listened to the podcast and watched the documentary in addition to all the research I'd done previously. So I feel like I'm pretty up to speed on this case.
You're going to give us the recap of all of it.
It's all of it. Strap in. Okay, here we go. John and Patsy married in 1980, and at that time, John had 3 children from a previous marriage. In 1989, John Ramsey formed the Advanced Product Group, which was one of 3 companies that merged to become Access Graphics. John then became president and CEO of Access Graphics, which was a computer services company that was then purchased by Lockheed Martin in 1991. And John remained president of the company after this purchase. Now, tragically, in 1992, John's oldest daughter, Elizabeth, was killed in a car crash when she was only 22 years old. So there's been a lot of tragedy in this family.
Yeah, that's rough.
Now, despite the personal loss, in 1996, Access Graphics grossed over $1 billion, and John Ramsey was named Entrepreneur of the Year by the Boulder Chamber of Commerce. So this is a pretty successful family.
Yeah.
Patsy had been a pageant queen in her earlier years, winning Miss West Virginia, and she and John together had 2 children, their son Burke, who was born in 1987, and JonBenet was born in 1990. And a little bit of trivia, JonBenet got her name from her dad. JonBenet Ramsey became JonBenet Ramsey.
Cute.
Only 3 years after giving birth to JonBenet, Patsy Ramsey was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, requiring a hysterectomy at only 36 years old.
It's a lot of change very quick.
It is. And that's a very, very young diagnosis. It was stage 4 when she was diagnosed.
Wow.
John and Patsy would say that JonBenet was always a very intuitive, spiritual child. She was only 18 months old when her sister was killed, so she couldn't have possibly really understood what was going on. But they said she would sense their grief and know exactly when to hug them. And then they described her as such a gift during that really awful time.
Oh, and they are little angels.
Absolutely. Patsy also said that when she was in the hospital battling cancer, JonBenet would come visit her and look at the huge bags of blood or the many other devices that Patsy was hooked up to. These things can appear very unsettling and scary, especially to a child. But JonBenet would be her mom's cheerleader and tell her that it was okay and that it wouldn't hurt very long. And she really helped to give Patsy the strength that she would need to fight for her life. And amazingly, after a year of really tough treatment, Patsy would be cancer-free. And I'm getting a little choked up there just because that's
a triumph.
That's quite a battle that this family had to go through.
Yeah.
Following in her mother's footsteps, JonBenet began doing pageants at only 4 years old. And she was really good at it. She was crowned 5 times, winning America's Royal Miss, Little Miss Charlevoix, Little Miss Colorado, Colorado State All-Star Kids Cover Girl, and National Tiny Miss Beauty.
So little.
I know. But that's a lot of crowns.
Yeah.
She only participated for 2 years?
Yeah.
To win 5 crowns? That's pretty good.
Yeah, big deal.
Chances are, whenever you hear the name JonBenet, it's these pictures of a little pageant girl that might be conjured up. Sometimes it's actually hard to picture her as just a normal, typical little 6-year-old girl, because that is not how she was portrayed in the media, despite her family saying that the pageants were actually a very small part of her life. One of the things that I'm sure our listeners have heard are the rumors that JonBenet did not especially enjoy participating in the pageants and that Patsy was forcing JonBenet to do them.
Well, it's a lot of work. I mean, I hope I don't get flack for that, but it is.
It
I
is
mean,
a lot of
it's
work.
a lot of work and a lot of long hours. It's hot. You have to wear clothes that aren't super comfortable. So, I mean, I can see how most 4-year-olds would not dig it.
I can see that. Now, the Ramsey have always said that this is untrue, that JonBenet loved performing. And as both a former little girl with an interest in performing and now as a mother of 3 children, I personally think this could go either way.
I agree. I agree. I think if you enjoy it, I think it could be great. But again, I don't think the typical 4-year-old would love it, but I know there are some that do.
Absolutely. And then even for myself, when I was little, I love dance. I love all of these things. And then there were times I just didn't want to go to class. And even with my boys, they love karate. And sometimes like they just don't want to do their karate.
Right.
So, they're kids.
They're kids.
So maybe she loved it, maybe she didn't. I guess we won't ever really know for sure.
And, I take what Patsy says about that with a grain of salt, because the fact of the matter is Patsy loved it. And so I think somehow, sometimes you can see your kids through your eyes. Like, well, if I loved it, they're going to love it.
That's true. That's true. And one of the things, this isn't in my notes here, but one of the things that was in that new Netflix documentary was Patsy saying, I wasn't sure if I was going to be at her wedding. I wasn't sure
Right.
if I was going to be there for her prom. I wasn't sure what I was going to be able to do with my daughter. So in a way, this was a chance for me to get to do those types of things with my daughter because I wasn't sure how long I'd be around.
That makes a lot of sense.
Another rumor that you're probably familiar with is that JonBenet was being abused prior to her death. And this comes from a couple of different places. The most compelling of which is, unfortunately, the autopsy revealed that she was sexually assaulted at the time of her death, but also found evidence of sexual abuse in the days preceding her death and chronically in the months preceding it. JonBenet's pediatrician said he never saw any indication that JonBenet had ever experienced sexual abuse, saying, quote, I can tell you as far as her medical history is concerned that there was never any hint whatsoever of sexual abuse. I didn't see any hint of emotional abuse or physical abuse. She was a very much loved child, just as her brother, end quote.
I assume you go more into that.
Well, here's the thing. There's not really a whole lot to go into because
I don't know that a pediatrician would know.
The thing is, you have an autopsy report saying that there was evidence that there was trauma that happened prior to her death, end quote.
Right.
And then you have a pediatrician saying, I never saw any sign of that.
Yeah. It's hard to know who to believe in that situation because I don't necessarily know if a pediatrician would know, especially if you have a well child. I mean, my kids don't see their pediatrician very often. So I don't know that their pediatrician would know. At the same time, in her autopsy report, do you just go with that on face value too? Because we've seen some of those have been incorrect as well.
Here's what I will tell you about this case. There are just some unanswered questions. This is the first of several. I don't know what to make of the report that there had been prior abuse. If there had been prior abuse, we don't know that it was her parents. We don't know that it was anybody, that we've ever even talked about. I don't really have any more information about that other than one report says one thing, her doctor says another. Now, I will tell you another reason why people believe that JonBenet was a victim of some type of abuse was because during the year 1995 and 1996, JonBenet visited the doctor 18 times.
Oh.
So it's interesting that you say, well, my kids don't go see the doctor very often.
Yeah, I mean, they literally go once a year or maybe twice.
Right.
18 times in a year?
In a year. And several of these visits were because of injuries sustained during various accidents. So, for instance, one of these times she accidentally got hit in the face with a golf club by Burke.
Okay.
She had a couple of falls. And then I don't have any medical records in front of me, but I can only assume that several of these visits were due to illnesses, and then your follow-ups and your annuals and vaccinations, things of that nature. Now, I recently mentioned on our show that my family has had an unusually high amount of doctor visits this year. My son started traditional school this fall. Previous to that, we'd been very careful. We never really stopped being careful after COVID for various reasons. So this has been the first time in several years where my little ones have been exposed to all the germs. So just for the fun of it, I counted. How many times have I been to the pediatrician this year? Want to take a guess?
It's probably close to 18. I mean, I think you've gone twice a month for like the last 6 months.
Yes. So I'm up to 11 at this point.
Yeah.
And that's not counting the 4 or 5 ER visits that I've also made.
Right. Also relating to the illnesses. Like you haven't had any like golf clubs to the face or anything, but
No.
So, I mean, I guess that's the case, but I don't know. 18 seems like a lot to me.
18 is a lot. And for me, that's between 2 little boys. So 18 is
18
a
for
lot.
one kid that doesn't have a chronic illness
that we know of, which I'm sure if she did, we would know.
Well, I think her pediatrician would have said, you know, if they're, but you know, was she asthmatic? Did she have a peanut allergy? I don't know. Like these are things that have been like, okay, well, I could probably see that. But knowing what we know, 18 seems like a lot.
It does seem like a lot. I absolutely agree. I don't know, especially as someone who's literally been to the pediatrician 11 times. We're not even
but again, for 2 kids though.
Right. But half of them have been in the last 3 months.
Right.
Half of those visits.
Right.
So all I'm saying is I don't know that it necessarily means she was being abused, but I can also understand why it might make people question it.
But it does seem like a lot to me without any other explanation.
I'm with you. I agree. On December 22nd, 1996, JonBenet performed in the National Tiny Miss Beauty pageant, and then the next day, December 23rd, the Ramseys hosted a Christmas party with 24 guests. Now, Patsy loved to entertain, so this was a big shindig. The Ramseys hired a Santa Claus to entertain the kids, and a man named Phil McReynolds played Santa at this party. Now, I bring this up because Phil is going to end up being a very popular suspect as far as public theories go. But authorities collected hair and handwriting samples from him and his wife in the first few months following the murder, and the police said they have never considered the McReynolds serious suspects. The Ramseys, however, wrote a book called Death of Innocence, the untold story of JonBenet's murder and how its exploitation compromised the pursuit of truth. And in this book, they named Phil McReynolds as a possible suspect.
Oh, their friend.
They hired him as a Santa Claus. He was an acquaintance.
Okay, got it.
Now, it is rumored that while at this party, JonBenet gave Santa a Christmas gift, a vial of gold glitter that she called Stardust.
So sweet.
And Phil would later take this gift into his heart surgery for good luck. During this Christmas party, JonBenet also allegedly gave Phil a tour of their 7,000 square foot Tudor-style home, including a tour of her bedroom and the basement.
This house is massive. I don't know which documentary I was watching, but it kind of had this like 3D model where you fly through the house. And it's also a really kind of confusing layout.
Okay. So
it's very choppy, in my opinion.
I'm glad you said that because, yes, I have also seen like 3D models and pictures. And the house is beautiful from the outside. And in one record, I read 6,500. So maybe it's not that big. Somewhere between 6,500 and 7,000 square foot. But you're right. It's very like hallways and weird staircases. It doesn't feel big.
Because it's very choppy and like these narrow spiral staircases. And then in some other areas, like you're walking up a level, but it's only like a few stairs. It's not a full level. And then you go down a level. And maybe that's because of the elevation in Colorado. I'm not sure. It doesn't look like a particular hilly area where they are in the photos that I've seen. But it's a very strange layout.
It is. It doesn't,
Like, I feel like I could get lost in that house.
as big as it is, it doesn't feel open. Well,
It's an odd layout.
and here's where that becomes important, which is probably where you're going with this. It's not intuitive, if you're not familiar with the house, to know where JonBenet's bedroom is, where the basement is, where anybody is, where anything is. It's not intuitive.
Right. And even, where JonBenet's bedroom is, like, so far away from her parents, which I don't know that means anything. I would just think it would be hard to have, my little one, like, so far away that I couldn't hear them.
So this house was an older house, a 3-story house, a basement, a main level, an upper level, and then the Ramseys built a 4th level, which became their master suite.
Right.
So JonBenet's bedroom was on the 2nd level of the home, on the opposite side of the house.
Exactly. That's far away.
It is far away.
Like, if she has a little tummy ache or something, is she going to walk like 2 stairs to, maybe they had an intercom system or something. I don't know. But I don't know. It's a strange layout for me.
It is. Santa got a tour of it.
Okay.
Now, at some point during this Christmas party, a police officer arrived at the home due to a 911 hang-up call that came from the house. Apparently, the Ramseys' close friend, Fleet White, and we're going to talk about him a little more in the future, may have been attempting to call 411 in an effort to get medicine to his mother, who I guess was in a hospital out of town. But instead of dialing 411, he mistakenly dialed 911 at 6:48 p.m. and then hung up. And then police attempted to call the Ramsey home, but no one answered, so an officer was dispatched. This officer did not make a report. Much has been made of this. What? A 911 call came in, and then 2 days later from this very same home, another 911 call was made. For me, it's just coincidence.
It's a strange coincidence, but yeah, I think it's a coincidence.
Yeah, for me, the guy had too much to drink and called 911 instead of 411. The police officer didn't think it was a big deal.
Right.
It's just something that after the fact seems strange, in my opinion. On December 25th, JonBenet woke up to a new bicycle for Christmas. And later that day, the Ramseys went to a Christmas party at Fleet White's house. So the man who accidentally called 911.
Okay.
They got home around 10 p.m. and their parents put them in bed. Initially, it was reported that the Ramseys said when they got home, the kids were awake, and John and Patsy took them upstairs to their separate bedrooms, read to them, and then the kids went to sleep. But later, the Ramseys would say that JonBenet specifically was already asleep, or at least falling asleep. And so when they got home, John took her straight up, put her in her bed, no reading, she just went straight to sleep.
Okay.
And the 2 different accounts has added to the suspicion that the Ramseys are involved in their daughter's death, because why are they changing their story? But John and Patsy would say that they always maintained JonBenet went straight to sleep. It was whoever was taking the reports initially must have gotten confused, because they say what they actually told them was that John came home and read for a while before going to sleep. And so somehow that got lost in translation and then made it from one report to another. And then now they're being accused of lying when they maintain that was never the case.
Okay. It does seem slightly nuanced.
There's another detail about this night that I really don't have a great explanation for. It's reported that originally Patsy said that when they got home, JonBenet was so sleepy that she went to bed in the red turtleneck sweater that she'd been wearing to the party. However, later it would be reported that Patsy changed her story and said that JonBenet went to bed in a white long sleeve shirt with a star on it, which is what JonBenet is going to be found in the next morning. Now, I don't know if this is another misrepresentation, something was reported wrong. I have heard that Patsy wanted JonBenet to wear a red turtleneck to the party to match Patsy, and JonBenet didn't want to. She wanted to wear the white shirt with the star. So I don't know if that's where the confusion comes in, but you might hear either situation reported. All I know for sure is when she was found the next morning, she's wearing the white shirt with the star. I share these things because if it's true that people are changing their stories, I think that's important to know.
Yes, of course.
At around 5:30 a.m. the next morning, December 26th, Patsy got up and got dressed and went down the spiral staircase in the back of the house that led to the kitchen. The Ramseys were scheduled to fly to Michigan later that day to have a second Christmas with John's adult children. On Patsy's way down the stairs, she said that she found 3 pages of notebook paper laying across one of the bottom stairs. When she picked up the paper, she started reading, and she got a few lines in before realizing the letter said that the writer had her daughter. She said she ran to JonBenet's room, saw that she was gone, screamed for John, and called the police. Now, this 911 call is very readily available. Just Google it and you can find it and listen to it. And a lot of people have opinions about this call. I'm just going to read the transcript to you, and then we're going to discuss a couple things.
Okay.
911 emergency. Police, what's going on? 755 15th Street. What's going on there, ma'am? We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please. Explain to me what's going on, okay? There's a note left, and our daughter is gone. A note was left, and your daughter is gone? Yes. How old is your daughter? She's 6 years old. She's blonde. 6 years old. How long ago was this? I don't know. I just found a note, and my daughter's missing. Does it say who took her? What? Does it say who took her? No, I don't know. It's there. There's a ransom note here. It's a ransom note? It says SBTC Victory. Please. Okay, what's your name? Are you Patsy Ramsey? I'm the mother. Oh my God, please. I'm sending an officer over. Okay, please. Do you know how long she's been gone? No, I don't. Please. We just got up and she's not here. Oh my God, please. Okay, please send somebody. I am, honey. Please. Take a deep breath for me, okay? Hurry, hurry, hurry. Patsy? 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 Nothing more is said directly to the dispatcher, and the call was disconnected. Now, like everything else in this case, we could have an entire podcast episode where we just break down this call, but that's not what we do here. We're not a long-form podcast. So I'm just going to hit the high points. If you want to deep dive, this is the case, and you can do this on just about every aspect of this case. So one of the strangest things about this call is the fact that it was disconnected. That's very unusual because typically someone calling 911 for help is going to keep that line open. It's literally in that moment, it's their lifeline. So to willingly hang up is very strange from a behavioral standpoint.
I absolutely agree.
Another very much talked about moment in this call is just prior to the call being disconnected, where Patsy stops talking to the dispatcher. Many people, including several sound experts, believe they hear what sounds like a young child talking in the background, and then someone else, presumably John Ramsey, responding back to this young voice.
Like Burke?
Well, that's the thing. So this would not be noteworthy, except for the fact that the Ramseys have always maintained Burke was asleep during this call and remained asleep until after the police arrived. So if the only 2 people awake are John and Patsy, because Burke is sleeping and JonBenet's missing, who is this childlike voice? The common theory here is that Patsy believed that she hung up the phone, but didn't actually disconnect, and that's when these other voices are heard. According to modern technology, 3 phrases from 3 different people can be heard at the end of the 911 call. Allegedly, you can hear John saying, quote, "We're not speaking to you," end quote. Before Patsy allegedly asked, "What did you do? Help me, Jesus." And then a voice believed to be Burke can then be heard saying, "What did you find?" Now, I listened to this enhanced audio and I hear none of that. I hear what probably sounds like people freaking out in the background, like hysterical, upset, as if they just realized their daughter was missing. That's what I hear.
I mean, how do you make out like actual words? Like, that's wild.
I didn't hear it. I've heard, the released version and they literally have the subtitles popping up. So I don't hear it, but aerospace sound experts broke down this call, and then it became a part of the official police investigation.
So you can hear the sound. It just sounds like garbled screams or rushed conversation. It doesn't read the way that this has been interpreted.
Yes. So you definitely hear something going on in the background. It could absolutely be people talking. It could be somebody screaming. Like, I don't make out words. You definitely hear voices in the background. But for me to try to decipher this is what they're saying, I am unable to do that.
Okay.
Now, this call and these alleged statements are going to really feed into one theory in particular, that Burke killed JonBenet, and in an effort to protect him, his parents covered it up. Adding fuel to the fire, the 911 operator who spoke with Patsy would later say the call seemed rehearsed. A little before 6 a.m., police officer Rick French arrived at the Ramsey home in a marked police car. This would later be considered a mistake because, again, at this point, it's believed JonBenet was kidnapped, and the ransom note, which we're going to go over in a minute, specifically says, do not contact the police or we are going to kill this little girl. Upon his arrival, Patsy gave Officer French the ransom note, and then he performed a very brief search of this gargantuan home. And when he got to the basement, he paused by the door that JonBenet was later found behind, but he didn't open it because it was latched closed and the latch was up high, and presumably it didn't appear to be a place that a 6-year-old could easily get to. So, hello, we have the officer on scene literally walking past the room that she's in.
And that was a mistake.
Huge mistake. Let's go over the ransom note. I'm going to read it for you. Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We respect your business, but not the country that it serves. At this time, we have your daughter in our possession. She is safe and unharmed, and if you want her to see 1997, you must follow our instructions to the letter. You will withdraw $118,000 from your account. $100,000 will be in $100 bills and the remaining $18,000 in $20 bills. Make sure that you bring an adequate size attaché to the bank. When you get home, you will put the money in a brown paper bag. I will call you between 8 and 10 a.m. tomorrow to instruct you on delivery. The delivery will be exhausting, so I advise you to be rested. If we monitor you getting the money early, we might call you early to arrange an earlier delivery of the money and hence a earlier pickup of your daughter. Any deviation of my instructions will result in the immediate execution of your daughter. You will also be denied her remains for proper burial. The 2 gentlemen watching over your daughter do not particularly like you, so I advise you not to provoke them. Speaking to anyone about your situation, such as police, FBI, etc., will result in your daughter being beheaded. If we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies. If you alert bank authorities, she dies. If the money is in any way marked or tampered with, she dies. You will be scanned for electronic devices, and if any are found, she dies. You can try to deceive us, but be warned that we are familiar with law enforcement countermeasures and tactics. You stand a 99% chance of killing your daughter if you try to outsmart us. Follow our instructions, and you stand a 100% chance of getting her back. You and your family are under constant scrutiny as well as the authorities. Don't try to grow a brain, John. You are not the only fat cat around, so don't think that killing will be difficult. Don't underestimate us, John. Use that good Southern common sense of yours. It is up to you now, John. Victory! SBTC.
I mean, that's a lot. I think that's a fabricated letter. It's wild. What a wild twist and turn. If it's a real letter, I mean, what kind of person wrote that?
Just like the 911 call, this ransom note could have its own episode, right? There are places you can go break down this entire note. I'm just going to hit the high points because we've got a lot to talk about. Probably the most commonly known bizarre thing about this note is the fact that it's a very long ransom note.
Crazy long. That's something that somebody scribbled at the house, or at least I wouldn't think they did, if they were an outside intruder.
Well, most ransom notes are short and to the point, but this one was written on 3 pieces of paper, and according to experts, this ransom note would have taken about 21 and a half minutes to write. which is even stranger when it is later determined that the note was written on paper from a notepad that came from the Ramsey house, and the pen used also came from the Ramsey house, which means whoever wrote this note sat in the house writing for more than 20 minutes. That's pretty risky, right? You just want to get in, grab the kid, get out, right? If that's what you're doing.
Or you would already had
a note written.
You would already had a note written.
And bring it with you,
Right.
which is probably what I would do because I want to spend as little time as possible.
Of course.
But
of course.
we know that the writing utensil and the paper it was written on came from the house.
Wild.
Investigators also found a practice note in the home. So one of the things authorities did that morning was ask John and Patsy Ramsey for handwriting samples. And John provided them with 2 legal pads with their handwriting. And one of these pads contained a draft of the beginning of the ransom note with some slight deviations. The first draft was made out to Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey, whereas the final note only addressed John. Not only is the length of the note strange, but the content is also unusual.
Yes.
For example, the writer refers to themselves as members of a small foreign faction. So that's interesting. That's not intimidating sounding. I'm a member of a small foreign faction. But it's true. If they're trying to intimidate, why not tell John, why tell John they're a small foreign faction?
Well, listen, they refer to themselves as a fat cat. So,
True.
Maybe that balances things out.
Maybe. They also say there is a 99% chance that if the Ramseys don't obey the commands given, their daughter's going to die. Why would you, if you're trying to convince somebody to do what you want, why would you give them even a 1% chance of getting away with it? You would say 100% chance. So the fact that they say you have a 99% chance, that's odd.
That's a good point.
The amount of money demanded, $118,000. Sure, that's a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money when you're talking about ransom for a human being, especially the daughter of a very wealthy family.
Right.
The number is interesting, however, because it's almost the exact amount of a bonus that John received from work. And this has caused people who believe the Ramseys to be guilty to think that the Ramseys must have chose this number because they had the knowledge of John's bonus. However, John Ramsey has said that this number was paid out in January of that year, so almost a year earlier, and it was on all of his pay stubs, which could be found in his house.
Anybody could have seen it, too.
Right. Anyone in the intruder camp says this number could have easily been seen by anyone in the house.
Sure. Or anyone from his office, quite frankly, anybody that works in the accounting department.
Exactly. This ransom note also seems to reference several action movies, specifically lines from Dirty Harry, Speed, and Ruthless People. So this could suggest that perhaps the writer's not a real kidnapper and doesn't know how to write a ransom note, which I think is fair to say.
Sure.
A handwriting analysis revealed that John Ramsey did not write the ransom note. However, Patsy Ramsey could not be completely eliminated as the writer. Now, I found a website called Statement Analysis. It was created by a retired supervisory deputy United States Marshal named Mark McClish. He has 26 years of federal law enforcement experience, and for 9 years, he taught interviewing techniques at the U.S. Marshal Service Training Academy. During this time, he conducted research on deceptive language, and based on those findings, he developed techniques to determine if a person is lying or telling the truth by analyzing the subject's language. He calls this method statement analysis. And Mark has studied JonBenet's case. I encourage you to check out his website. There's a lot of really interesting information regarding the case. But he did have something specifically to say about some of the speech used in the ransom note that I thought was really interesting. Mark says the word hints is not a very common word. And think about it. When was the last time you used that word in a sentence? It's not like a widely used word. Mark suggested looking to see if this word appeared in any writings of John and Patsy Ramsey, and it does. On December 14th, 1997, the First United Methodist Church in Boulder, Colorado held a memorial service for JonBenet, and in this program, there was a Christmas message from the Ramsey family. This message was also posted on the Ramsey family's website, and in the message, we find the statement, quote, "Had there been no birth of Christ, there would be no hope of eternal life, and hence no hope of ever being with our loved ones again," end quote. Here's the thing. The word hence is a transition word. You do not have to use the word and with it.
Yes.
So, for example, profits were down this year, hence you will not be receiving a bonus.
Hence. Who would write that? That's weird.
Most people use the word hence and not the words and hence. But the writer of the ransom note used the phrase and hence, and in their Christmas message, the Ramseys used the phrase and hence. Had there been no birth of Christ, there would be no hope of eternal life, and hence no hope of ever being with our loved ones again.
Oh, snap. Okay, that kind of moves the needle for me a little bit, Cynthia.
Well, listen to this. In their book, The Death of Innocence, Patsy Ramsey addresses the use of the phrase and hence.
Okay.
She says, actually, I have no idea why we used that phrase. Maybe we'd seen it so many times in reading the ransom note and having to write it over and over again for the police that it became a part of our subconscious vocabulary. Who knows? Then again, maybe people everywhere use the phrase and hence every day of the week because it's a normal part of the English language.
I don't know about that.
I thought it was interesting.
That is compelling to me. As small of a detail as it is, I don't think I've ever heard anybody say and hence. And again, the Ramseys are hanging in pretty educated circles. So most of the people that are with them are going to know how to use the word hence. And saying and hence to me, like, I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that. It stuck out like a sore thumb. Now, when you read the ransom letter, I'm assuming it's going to have grammatical errors. But when you read their Christmas message, it stuck out like a sore thumb to me immediately.
Okay. Well, I wanted to bring this up because it felt fresh to me. And I thought it was interesting.
I absolutely think. And again, it moves the needle for me a little bit, maybe pointing back to the Ramsey family.
Well, I will say this, though. If you have been forced to write this note several times because they want to compare your handwriting, I can see how it could kind of get in your head. I actually kind of get her argument a little bit.
Is it possible? Yes. But then she also said, but people just say and hence sometimes. No, they don't.
Okay. So no, for you, that's the part that no.
I get the letter. If she had just stuck with that, I'd been like, okay, maybe. But the fact that she added these other things to explain it away, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that.
See, and I've become a bit of a Patsy Ramsey fan. Spoiler alert, I actually kind of like Patsy Ramsey. And for me, her adding that on at the end was just like, well, maybe here's a perfectly reasonable explanation, or maybe it's just because that's what people do. And I'm just kind of like, yeah, you go, girl. I mean,
And maybe that's all it was. But to me, it's like, well, you're explaining too much.
No, I get it. I hear you. Yeah. I hear you. So if you want to look more further into Mark McClish's work, this is just one little excerpt of his work. It's very interesting. You should definitely go check it out. His information's in our show notes. Believing the crime was a kidnapping, authorities roped off JonBenet's bedroom with yellow and black crime scene tape to preserve whatever evidence her abductor may have left behind. But for reasons unknown, they didn't seal the rest of the house, which would also be part of the crime scene, right?
Right.
Now, at this point in the morning, the house is starting to get pretty busy because after calling 911, Patsy called her and John's close friends, Fleet and Priscilla White, who I've previously mentioned, and then John and Barbara Fernie, who arrived at the Ramsey home along with the Ramsey's minister. So they brought in a support system. It's very obvious they were very close with these friends, more like a family type relationship, I think. So it made sense that they came over and were there.
It actually is not shocking to me that they invited friends over.
Right. At some point, Burke was taken to the Whites' home, but the Ramsey house continued to fill up due to the police calling in a team of victims advocates who were trained in helping families through traumatic situations, which is a beautiful thing.
Sure.
These advocates arrived with bagels and coffee. They placed them in the kitchen for service. And then afterwards, they began cleaning the Ramsey kitchen, even wiping down the counters with spray cleaner and potentially wiping away very important evidence. And I think most of us are aware that the JonBenet Ramsey case could be the poster child for botched police work. And we can only assume that it was a lack of knowledge and resources that caused this case to be handled so poorly. The truth is, the JonBenet Ramsey case was the very first homicide in Boulder in all of 1996, and there were only 5 days left in the year.
Wow. Okay. I didn't realize that.
On top of that, there had never been a kidnapping case with ransom before.
Huh. Interesting. I don't blame the family or the friends. I think they're just trying to be helpful.
I don't believe the Ramsey family can be expected to be thinking straight
No.
at all.
No.
And the friends, really, they're just there too. And also, we have to remember, this is 1996. This is before the internet is
Sure.
This is before smartphones.
Sure.
This is before true crime podcasts were on everybody's playlist. We know a lot more now than they did back then.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair to say that
But the police should have known.
they should have known.
They should have known, and they should have roped off the whole house. It fits in line with a police officer coming to the house and not even checking out the entire house.
Well, oh my gosh, can you imagine?
You know what I mean? It all goes hand in glove.
Right.
You know, all these different pieces that just shows a very inexperienced police department.
Well, I think it's fair to say the Boulder Police Department was ill-equipped to deal with this kind of a case. They should have asked for help. They should have asked for help immediately. And even in the best case scenario, we have to keep in mind this happened over the holidays. So they had even less officers available to attend the scene.
Sure.
For much of this day, there was only one detective even in the home, and she was attempting to contact dispatch to get backup, and people weren't even responding. According to the ransom note, the kidnappers would be calling between 8 and 10 that morning with further instructions, and John was prepped by authorities on how to handle this call when it came in, but 10 a.m. came and went with no phone call. According to authorities on the scene, neither John nor Patsy seemed to notice or say anything when the kidnappers failed to call.
Oh, that would have been unusual.
Here's the thing. We're going to find out later that I personally don't know that we can really trust the Boulder PD's interpretation of things.
Okay.
Because of things that we're going to learn that I personally have not always been aware of. Linda Arndt was the first detective on the scene, and she made it very clear who she believed to be responsible for JonBenet's death. In a TV interview, she described John Ramsey as being cordial. She noted him going through the mail casually, not at all what she would expect a concerned father to be doing, and this got her spidey senses going. John Ramsey said that yes, he did go through the mail. He said he was looking for anything to do. He was very antsy, and his mail was delivered through a slot in the door, and he thought it might be a good idea to look through it to see if there was any other communication from the kidnappers.
I think that's smart.
Me too.
I don't see a problem with this.
After several hours, Detective Linda Arndt, seeing that John was really antsy, presumably gave him a job to help keep him busy. She told him to do a, quote, top to bottom, end quote, search of the home. Now, Linda is later going to reference how she told him to search the house top to bottom, yet John started his search at the bottom, literally heading straight for the basement where we know he would find JonBenet. John said he chose to start in the basement because that would have been the easiest entry for an intruder. So for him, it just made sense. So he and Fleet White went to the basement. And John said that the very first thing he noticed was that the window in front of him when he got downstairs was broken and it was wide open. And there was also a hard shell suitcase underneath the window. John told Fleet that he had broken the window the previous summer when he'd lost his keys and gotten locked out of the house when nobody else was home. But he thought they'd fixed it, but maybe they didn't. He then said that he knew for sure that the suitcase had been moved to the spot where it was sitting under the window because that was not where it was normally found. Now, the basement is set up very similarly to the rest of the house. It's not just an open basement. It's a bunch of different rooms.
Right.
So when John and Fleet came to the wine room, which was the room that Officer French did not enter earlier in the day, John Ramsey did open the door and immediately saw JonBenet laying on the floor in front of him. She had tape over her mouth, and her hands were tied with a white cord over her head at the wrists. John screamed, grabbed her, ripped the tape off of her mouth, tried to untie her hands, but was unable to. and carried his daughter upstairs. Once upstairs, Linda checked JonBenet for a pulse, and there was none. JonBenet was dead.
I talked about this right before we started recording this episode about how the sensationalism and the saturation of coverage of this case almost makes you lose sight of the fact this is a 6-year-old baby. It's just horrendous. It's absolutely the worst thing that I can ever think about.
It is horrendous. I'm going to tell you, this is where I'm going to leave you for part 1.
What?
And I can tell you that part 2, we dive into her cause of death, her autopsy, what we believe happened, or the many theories, and it's pretty rough. So this is where I'm going to leave you. And I know it's in a really sad place. So why don't you, Stefanie, bring us up with our Branch of Hope recipient for the month of December 2024.
Yeah, you're rotten.
I'm sorry.
You're a mean one, Mr. Grinch.
I know.
We introduced our Branch of Hope last week when we talked about the Sandra Hemme case. And without the Innocence Project, who is our nonprofit organization of the month, I don't know that Sandy would be out. I don't know how she would have found the representation to have her freed.
I agree with you. I honestly think without their help, I think she'd still be in prison for a crime that she did not commit.
Absolutely. I'm going to read to you a little bit of what the Innocence Project has on their website, so you will know where a portion of all our earnings are going. The Innocence Project works to free the innocent, prevent wrongful convictions, and create fair, compassionate, and equitable systems for justice for everyone. Their work is guided by science and grounded in anti-racism. They use DNA and other scientific advancements to prove innocence, and they are committed to helping each person they represent rebuild their lives post-release, which I also think is so incredibly poignant and important. They have helped free more than 250 innocent people.
It's amazing.
From prison. It absolutely is. So our funds sent to them will work to strengthen and advance the innocence movement. And we're so happy to be a part of that. If you are a Patreon member, feel really good knowing that you are helping to support us as creators and also the Innocence Project this month. You gave to charity, and you know what? You didn't even have to do anything extra. We did it for you.
Win, win, win.
Win, win, win. So the Innocence Project, I have a feeling they may be our Branch of Hope nonprofit organization more.
Yes.
We're going to pick them several more times over the next few years, I'm sure, because they absolutely deserve it. So we're very appreciative to be able to partner with them this month.
Absolutely.
Okay, so next week, part 2.
Join us next week for part 2.
When it's dark oak time.
I know, I was going to say, and don't forget, baby, it's dark oak time.
There you go. All right, Shiver Seekers, thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye-bye. This episode of The Dark Oak was created, researched, written, recorded, hosted, edited, published, and marketed by Cynthia and Stefanie of Just Us Gals Productions, and made possible by you, our shiver-seeking listener. Special thanks goes to Justice Himes for our incredible artwork and Ryan Crete for our amazing music.